Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monty Bottens. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Today we welcome Jeanne Carver, founder and president of Shaniko Wool. Her story is one of successful adaptation to changing market needs. Jeanne and her late husband Dan have been using sustainable regenerative practices for decades. Jeanne shares with us that Dan was an engineer and a systems thinker, which is key to how they understood the land, the soil, and their operation. She and Dan transitioned it from selling commodity lamb and wool to selling retail products that are ecologically sensitive. With the founding of Shaniko Wool Company, she has overseen the expansion of the Responsible Wool Standard Certified American Wool into a variety of products and markets by working first with the ranchers and with designers, brands, and exclusively U.S. supply chain partners. There is so much packed into this wonderful discussion, so let's jump right in.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the AgEmerge podcast. I'm blessed to be joined by Jeanne Carver from Oregon. Welcome, Jeanne. How are you today?
I'm pretty good. The sun is out and the world of ice is starting to melt, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Well, we're recording this in mid-January, and hopefully by the time it airs, that ice is going to be gone. So that's good. But no, thank you for taking time to be with us today. And I think you've got an amazing story, you and your ranch and team and larger group. I don't want to spoil all the fun here, but if you would just share with us your farming story and how you guys got involved and where that's grown to today.
Wow, that's a big question. How many days do we have?
Well, we have all
Well,
the time you want, but seriously, dive into it a little bit about
I
how you guys got to Eastern
okay.
Oregon there and what that's and some of those turning points you've had in your farm.
Well, my husband and I were both native Oregonians. He grew up on the Oregon coast where the big trees are, and his grandfathers logged and his father logged and he logged to pay his way through college, but they always spent their free time in the Owyhee country in southeast Oregon, which is referred to as Oregon's outback. It's desert country. And maybe because they were in that wet coastal climate, they loved to dry out in the desert. So he grew up really acquiring this dream of ranching in the Oregon desert. That was his dream. And I went to high school right here where I am. Well, it's 20 miles to town, but that was the little local school. And when I graduated from college, from high school and went off to college, like a lot of young people, I thought, I'll never see that place again. You should never say that. You never know what's coming. Anyway, excuse me. My husband went to Oregon State University and, paid his way through college with his money from logging. But he's always said that it always hurt him to take down a big tree. Something in him, it just didn't feel right, and he loved the land. He's loved the land all his life. And so he ended up going to Vietnam after college, and he saved every penny that he made. And when he came back, he started his own business, knowing that that's how he would get ahead in life. And as his business grew in the western side of the state, he kept putting all of his money into that business until it allowed him to have enough to start buying into his dream. So he bought his first farming operation over on the western side of Oregon. And as his cow herd grew, he needed more land, and he began looking east of the mountains into this high desert interior country, and ultimately landed here in the late 1980s. And of course, I have another path, but we'll just jump into the story right there. We ended up here where, in his own words, he wanted to see the land win. That was always his concern. And so now that he had the opportunity, he had studied, by the way, business and engineering in college. So he was a systems thinker. And that's how he had built his original businesses in a way that would allow him to buy into his dream of ranching in the Oregon desert. And so once he arrived here, he reached out to local agency partners that we are blessed here in America to have their support in managing these landscapes. So people like our local soil and water conservation district team, Natural Resource Conservation Service, those NRCS and SWCD teams were really, really important as he formulated over the course of a year of having them out, setting up monitoring and looking at this big landscape and saying, I want to manage this so that the health of the natural resources is the primary focus. Everything we do was going to focus around the health of natural resources, because having been in his previous fields of work, he knew that the healthier that resource, the healthier his harvest, and the healthier your bottom line. So if you're going to ensure your future on this land, then you have to take care of the soil and the grasslands and those cycles that are connected of mineral, water, soil, carbon, and so on. So he really began. And so by 1989, we had a conservation management plan for this entire operation. And that was our focus in our life, was managing for the health of resources. And of course, grazing is a huge part of that on these landscapes. So he began immediately implementing a broad set of changes and, practices today that are being referred to as regenerative, which, and in the ecosystem services, carbon contract arenas, they're looked at as additionality practices. But back then it was conservation. Those of us that have been in this a long time, we lived through the conservation era, and then it was the sustainability era. Today it's regenerative or climate smart. I don't really care what anybody wants to call it. Uh, the
Just do it,
fundamental
right?
things are still there: soil and water and grasses and grazing animals, right? And those are the cycles that we tend to nurture. And so really that's what happened was we were on this focus of stewardship and producing crops in a dry land environment and grazing. And this, when we came here, we had this opportunity to buy the heart of a very historic ranch. So our Imperial Stock Ranch in north central Oregon has been going since 1871. This is be our 153rd year of continuous operation. Excuse me. And it was started by a young man who was born in a wagon on the Oregon Trail. So many listeners are going to know and relate to this story, right? He was born in the ox cart as they came west, and that family went through, as most of the settlers did, to that fertile Willamette Valley west of the Cascade Mountains, where they had rich soil, lots of rain, not so many rocks as we have, and they could grow anything in the world, and they raised their families, they built their farms, they built communities. But this young man, Richard Henton, he grew up with a love of livestock, and he dreamed of ranching livestock in a bigger way. But he came up in that community where everybody did everything back then, right? You had hogs and chickens and cattle and milk cows, and you farmed and sheep for fiber. You had everything. They were pretty self-contained, and they worked exclusively locally for what they needed for their survival, right? And in 1871, this young man at 19 years of age saddled his horse and packed his pack horses and headed east of the Cascade Mountains into the interior. And he filed on this 160-acre homestead claim I'm sitting in. And the Imperial Stock Ranch, which is what he named it, about 30 years later, From that 160-acre homestead claim, he then was the largest individually owned land and livestock holding in the state of Oregon, and ultimately one of the largest sheep ranches in Western America, running tens of thousands of head of sheep. So what we carry on is we carry on the stewardship of the land first, the continuing of the operation, which has had cattle, sheep, grain, and hay production throughout its history from the 1870s on this landscape. And we carry that on, and we've become stewards of the land first, the operation second, all the buildings and facilities, which our headquarters is an amazing walking tour because all the significant structures were built before industrialization. So you can see the evolution of this place from horsepower to the most modern no-till equipment that exists for farming today. It's an amazing tour, and you can walk through the museum room in the big barn with the rows of saddles from the 1800s, the buckaroo cowboys, and we're still doing it, Monty. We're still here, we're still standing somehow, but we are the stewards of all those things: the land, the operation, the buildings and facilities, and the history of the people, all those who have come before us. And so you're pretty humbled by that every day, to carry this on and find a way to protect its future and preserve its viability going forward. And that's what was at the heart of what Dan put together here, was how do we ensure that this can carry on with the ever-changing factors and circumstances we all face today.
Great story, and it's great to hear the history continuing on. Now, you're not family of the original settler of the Imperial, correct?
No, Richard
Okay.
Hinton was the settler that founded and established the operation, his homestead claim, and then built his ranching empire. He did name it the Imperial Stock Ranch. And then his son James, who was born in the cave here, 2 miles north of the headquarters, was a cave in the creek bank that he put a door and put a door over the entrance and enlarged it. And that dugout, we still can pick apples from the trees down there. That was his first home. So his children were born in that dugout cave. And so James Hinton carried on beginning in about 1915. And then he took on a partner in the 1930s named George Ward. And at that point in 1945, it became the Hinton Ward Ranch. So it was Imperial Stock Ranch for 75 years. Then it began operating as the Hinton Ward Ranch. And then George Ward bought the remaining interest from James Hinton in 1967. And they carried it only about 20 years until Dan was able to purchase. So it went from Hinton's to Carver's, to the Wards, to the Carver family. And when we were forced into direct marketing in 1999, I had already been doing the research and writing the application for the National Register of Historic Places. So we're also the only ranch in Oregon that's on the National Register of Historic Places that's actually still operating.
Hmm.
And I went back because of that research. When we went down this road in 1999 of value-added marketing for survival, we went back to the historic name and began putting Imperial Stock Ranch products in the market. So we brought the historic name back to life. But it's really just gone from the Hinton family to the Ward family to the Carver family, and the ranch has never been on the market.
So I think that's an important point for everybody, and myself included, that just because it's not blood family doesn't mean that the legacy of a farm or the history and identity of a farm can't pass from person to person outside of a family. So that's neat how you've honored the past there at the museum and
Wow.
what you've got going on, and never
Well,
forget that
Monty,
there's an opportunity to share that with others, and it doesn't have to be just family.
thank you. Because, one thing I learned and what taught us this was the value-added marketing. I will tell you, So many lessons came to us through that.
Okay, now
Recognition of
hold
what we do. Well, I know, but
hold,
I want to
hold on
say,
just
because
I
of what you
okay, go ahead.
said, is the land is bigger than any of us. What we do in agriculture is so timeless. It's so timeless. It's before us, it's after us. We've been given these gifts of creation that we tend and steward and nurture, and that will carry on before us, during us, and after us, you know. So it's the land is what counts. It's where life begins and ends, and it surpasses any single story or effort. We're just the temporary stewards. Yeah. So you made
Great.
a great point.
The AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. The ASN team is hands-on, digging in and invested in regenerative agriculture. Along with the proper plant nutrition and biologicals to boost your soil microbiome, we provide the ideas and implementation guidance to support you on your soil health journey. So stop farming the same way and contact Ag Solutions Network today at asn.farm.
Well, I thank you for adding that in there. And what I was wanting to do is just back up a little bit to your story there from 1999 and your husband. He said you guys were shearing, right? And up until that moment in time, you really were kind of from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, but more of a traditional farmer, rancher. You're growing a crop or a product, whether it's wool or lamb, mutton, beef, grain, wheat. You're growing a product and you expect somebody to buy it. And that is how the commodity market works. You grow something, you expect somebody to buy it. And you made the call in 1999 to your longtime wool buyer, and they said, what?
Sorry, folks, we're not buying. We're closing our processing and going offshore like everybody else. I mean, for 100 years, this ranch had sold wool to that company. It's all you knew. And as you mentioned a minute ago, it preceded, it covered generations of the same family, and it covered different families managing and stewarding this land. But all we knew was that company. That's where the wool went every year. And you're right. Everything we harvested sold as a commodity. That's how it was done. As far as we knew, that's what you did in agriculture. And so we got off the phone, and my husband looked at me. And of course, the sheep have been here for a long time, and they were very significant in this ranch's history, and they're important. Their impacts to the landscape are very, very important. And he said, well, I guess we're going to have to figure out a different way. Now, you have to remember, he was an engineer and a businessman. I hadn't studied either of those, and neither one of us had studied agriculture. I came in from, I was a biomechanist. I was a coach at the Division I level. I had been a two-sport athlete in college. I was fiercely competitive. That's one thing that I had going for me. Give me any job and I'm going to get to the end with it and figure out how to get it done. Of course, we were both rural raised and blue collar families. So you know something about common sense and figuring out how to stand on your own 2 feet and adapt, right? Those who adapt survive. And this now called for us to adapt. Dan had led this amazing work on the ground, because by 1999, we had been a decade down the road under this conservation management plan. We were seeing amazing changes. Observations, species counts were changing, yield data was changing. We had tangible things to tell us that this vision that he had was working. Okay. And so they said, that's it. Well, by the summer that year, because we called the wool buyer in April, by July, when you were weaning lambs and hoping to sell your market lambs, it was another hard reality. The pressure from imports, the consolidation in our food sector. We really had one buyer commercially of lamb left in all of Western America. And the price for lamb that summer was 50 cents a pound for lamb. 50 cents a pound. You can't sell your wool. And we don't even want to get into the predator discussion, but we were losing 40% of the lamb crop to predation. The old ways were not working anymore. Everything is changing. Market factors, the culture. And today we talk about, and even more so now, climate factors. And so all these things are changing. So as a producer, as a harvester of these gifts of creation, we have to find new ways to position them in the market in order to get a return on our, in order to get an economic value and continue to take care of this land and these animals. And so my husband gave me a challenge. He said, either we find our own way to sell what the sheep provide us, and truly they've provided humankind for more than 10,000 years, or the sheep are gone from the land. That was my challenge in the summer of 99. And so I began the journey. I started on the wool because we had no market. Nobody could sell their wool in our region. People were trying to dump it. They were just storing it. You can't burn it. Wool doesn't. It's anti-flammable. It's a miracle fiber. It's the most miracle fiber God gave us. It's unbelievable. And so I began on the wool, and a few months into that, my husband said, well, work on the meat. That's where the real money is. And I'm like, darn it. He's always this idea man, and I'm the worker bee, right? And so in parallel, 1 year later, in June of 2000, we put our first wool product in the market and our first lamb to restaurants in our region. And then we never looked back. And that first placing of lamb in the market drove the interest in more lamb and in beef. And so it wasn't very long before we were running our weekly delivery routes, delivering beef and lamb to our restaurant clientele. We've done some grocery case, but really our home, what fit for us was the restaurant market. And we were not anyone who was going to do farmers markets with fiber or food, because we're 2 hours from our 2 to 3 hours from our closest real market of any size that would have a farmer's market in town. And as most farmers and ranchers of any size probably would agree, I don't want to spend my weekends driving to town and sitting in a booth in the town and driving home. What a horrible way to spend your weekend. Now, it's worked really well for a lot of people, but for us, it didn't work. And I think what we knew instinctively from the beginning is we had, just as on the land, we have different soils, we have different locations, we produce different crops, we have different mineral components, we are at different elevations. We have to find a way where we live to tend our own garden and flourish and steward nature and create harvest. And so it's going to be different for all of us because our situations are different. We had to find the same thing in marketing. You had to be creative in finding a method, both an audience and a consumer, and a model that would work for your life so that you could still retain the life that you desired, which was rural and an agricultural lifestyle.
So at the moment in time in 1999, when your husband Dan and you sat down and talked about, um, we have to do something here. We either have to sell the herd, the flock, or we have to sell the wool and the meat. Um, it was a choice, right? You didn't have to sell the wool. You could have gone on with beef, cattle, or something else, and just kind of given up on the lamb. Or was this, you had to do this to make the ranch work?
Well, the sheep numbers have changed here in terms of how important they were to the economics of the ranch. this ranch began to shift, as many did in this country after World War II. You know, you had a number of things contributing to that. Manpower was one of them, right? Continued industrialization and manpower challenges as people left for the city for better work, better pay, easier living conditions. You had a shift as they retrofitted those factories and began to produce oil-based synthetic fibers. Because that movement, which we are seeing the results of today in terms of our health and the condition of the planet, that was coming on hard. So you had synthetics taking more and more of the market, wool becoming less and less important. We hadn't learned the lessons that would create yet. And manpower. So the ranch was shifting from sheep being the largest entity, it was shifting more to cattle and continuing the farming. So from a pure survival point in 1999, we could have let the sheep production go and as a ranch been just fine. We had cattle, grain, and hay production. And whether you use sheep to graze the land or cattle to graze the land or some other grazing animal to graze the land, you can still make those impacts. So we had a chance to let it go, Monty, but you know, how do you be here and not say that how do you see what the sheep bring to our lives as humankind, what they've given to us as a species, and say they don't matter? How do you do that? How do you say that the way they graze the land and the plants they choose first to graze that are different than cattle, how do you say that's not important? How do you say that wool doesn't matter? It's the ultimate performance fiber. The ultimate performance fiber. And I say that there's more support for that today than there was in 1999 because we're in a different situation on this earth now than we were in 1999. And so we could have let it go. But the history, how do you not live here every day and touch this dirt and see these grasslands and not appreciate the efforts of those before? So you appreciated the history, you appreciate the unique role sheep have had in the history of humankind and the gift they are to us, every species, and you just go, how do you say they don't count? I was highly motivated to make it work. I love the sheep. They touch my spirit. It's no accident. They are symbolic throughout every religion of the world. It's not an accident. I could not turn my back on the beautiful creation that they are. I couldn't do it. And so I began the work, and here we are today. I'm still telling the story of the incredible impacts sheep have on the earth and in the life of humans.
I appreciate that answer because what I was looking at is a lot of times farmers, when we face adversity with a various, certain crop or a certain livestock species we're working with goes to zero or becomes negative or don't have a market for it, we just give up because we have the mindset that we're a commodity seller. And that's, well, nobody to buy it. I'm not going to raise it. But what I love is your tenacity and your passion to say, hey, you didn't sit there with a business plan saying, oh, well, gee, I think I'll have a value added enterprise, and this value added enterprise will retain more gross margin and more top line revenue growth for our farm and offer us more bottom line. No, you said, well, I want sheep. We're going to make it happen. I don't care what it takes. I'm not going to lose. And that was the beginning of your value. You were doing you didn't know it was value added, right? You weren't calling it that. It's like, no, I want our sheep to stay. That's why you did this. And I think that's an
I
amazing
didn't
story.
know any of those. I didn't know any of those words you just used.
Perfect. You don't
I
need
didn't
to.
know what I didn't know what a margin was. I didn't know there were wholesale and retail markets. I didn't know anything about business. I still don't claim to be a business person. I don't even like business. I don't like business. I'm not a wool expert either. I had no training in marketing or branding or messaging. I simply competed, and we were logical. We applied our common sense, and we worked hard. And 13 years, I was 13 years down that road. And I would say multiple things. I said a lot of things to Dan over those 13 years. But, one of them was, if only somebody would come down this dirt road and see who we are and what we do and why it matters. It can make all the difference. We need somebody with the power to influence others. Nobody's listening to me. I'm just a ranch wife in the middle of nowhere, right? But they couldn't make me quit. In fact, they made me mad every time people would say, well, you can't make anything here in America. It used to tick me off. Or the other one is, well, wool doesn't have any value. You may as well dump it. Wool doesn't have value, and we can't make things in America. Don't those just get your, don't just, doesn't that just make your neck heat up? I mean, I'm just like, why not? Why can't we? Probably the greatest thing I had going for me was that I didn't know I couldn't do it. you know? And then
That
another thing, so who's going to come down this dirt road and see
then
why this matters?
then
And
your
that
prayer was
happened
answered.
13 years later. 13 years. During the 2012 London Olympics, there was an uproar over the Chinese-made Team USA uniforms. Somebody brought it to somebody's attention. Gee, how come we're not making our own uniforms for Team USA for the Olympics? Why is that? Well, Ralph Lauren is the company that is the supporter of the US Olympic team and the vendor for their uniforms. And they responded to that crisis immediately. In fact, it was August. The London Olympics were ongoing, summertime. We were in harvest and we came in for lunch. And I always made lunch. Dan would get in his recliner, have lunch and take a short nap and then back out the door. And I took the phone outside in the backyard because I didn't want to disturb him, because there were 15 phone messages that all had to do with the marketing businesses at that point. And I started returning messages. And by that time we had yarn from our ranch in hundreds of stores across America. So when one of these phone calls was a gentleman, I said, which yarn store are you with? And he said, I'm not with a yarn store. I'm with product development for Polo Ralph Lauren in New York. And I sort of got quiet and said, are you serious? Ralph Lauren in New York? He said, yes, I'm sitting right here on Madison Avenue. It's 650 Madison Avenue, by the way. I've had the good fortune to visit there numerous times now. And I said, well, that's amazing, because I'm sitting out here in the Oregon desert. In fact, I'm outside right now. Can you hear the sheep? And I held up the phone for about 10, 15 seconds, and I transported him to our world. Later, I got to visit him in his office, which was a cubicle on the whatever floor it was in a high rise on Madison Avenue. But I transported him in those moments as he could hear the sheep had come in for a drink at the spring. They happened to be in a ridge pasture behind the headquarters of the ranch and behind my backyard where the creek flows. They were shaded up midday. They were having a drink at the spring, and then you could hear some of them start to move out. The mamas calling the babies, and the babies. So you could hear the of their voices and the tingle of the sheep bells, and it was magic. And he was transported. I came back on the phone and I said, "Did you hear them?" He said, "That's amazing." I said, "No, it's amazing you're calling me. How'd you find me?" And the conversation went from there. I sold my heart out for 45 minutes. I still get emotional when I think about it. How likely was that somebody in New York would pick up the phone and call us? How likely was that? It's something I couldn't even have dreamed of. It was beyond my dreams. And he called me every day for a month. Every day after that, he called. And I would answer questions, and I had sent samples, and I'd sent more samples. And then he called on a Thursday about a month into this, and he said, Jeannie, what are you doing next Tuesday? I said, I kind of laughed because we do the same thing every day, don't we? And I said, he goes, are you going to be home? I said, yes, I'm home. Why are you asking? He says, we'd like to send our design team out. I said, here from New York? He said, yes. And of course, I instantly panicked. And my first thoughts were, oh my gosh, what will I wear? Because I didn't own one piece of Ralph Lauren clothing, right? I got my Carhartts and my Wranglers and my, all my, regular work gear. I'm like, what will I wear? And the second thing is, what will I feed them? Because everyone that comes here, you feed them. There's no town, there's no deli, you cook. Anyway, a month later, I guess the next Tuesday they came. And we did what we do to all visitors. Now you have to realize we had been touring many people here, and it wasn't always from the marketing. We had started in the 90s touring people because of the practices we were implementing under our conservation management plan. We were doing a lot of resource tours here. Hundreds and thousands of people would come through, and we would tell the story of the change up of our thinking and our management and what we were seeing as a return for that on the land. And so when they came, we did the same thing we do. We met them up on top, and we began telling the story of ranching and converting to no-till farming on dryland cropland, about 4,000 acres, which we converted in 1996. Today, they can pay you to convert. We did it because we felt it was the right thing to do. How we changed up the grazing, how we changed up all of these things. And it had created habitat for the return and the growth of species numbers. Not only were we improving our harvest in terms of yield data, but one of the indicator species was salmon spawning in our creeks. And in 1990, our Fish and Wildlife partners had talked about the number of salmon that was dwindling. And collectively, everyone in our region, we were working together cooperatively to see if we couldn't make a change, hoping in our lifetime we would see it. And now we had thousands of salmon returning to a creek where before there had been 2 in 1990. This was the greatest win, the greatest story we had to tell. And that's the story we told the Ralph Lauren team, the design team. Is we brought them home to the beginning of the value chain, the soil, the grasslands, the grazing animals, and stewarding soil, water, mineral, and the biodiversity impacts of well-managed grazing and agricultural operations, the positive impacts. And so we took them on about a 3-hour ranch tour, and then we walked them through the historic buildings, and then we fed them right here at the kitchen table. And we fed them the harvests of this place. And then I took them to the archives of the textile and the wool business. And they were clutching those skeins of yarn because now they were connected to our heritage, this deep heritage, and even more importantly, the story of the land and how it is life to all of us. It's where we begin and it's where we end. And they were holding the beginning of that story that they would then design into this beautiful uniform for Team USA to walk into the opening ceremonies of the Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia in 2014. So there they were clutching the yarn, and I thought, wow, maybe this really could happen. And then 6 months later, about Christmas of 2012, we got the biggest yarn order of our life up to then for what would become the opening ceremony uniforms for Team USA in Sochi for the Winter Olympics. And then they made a film about us. They interviewed 41 companies they worked with in the United States to make everything they needed for Team USA. They interviewed all of us, and they chose to tell one story, and it was ours. And that's because everyone in your audience should take pride in this, because it's their story. We were the only actual ranch, the farmer, the rancher that brought the harvest that becomes the things that feed, clothe, and shelter us. And so they told our story. And when they did that, see, that was the voice that had the power to influence others. And it changed our life. It truly changed our life. And so would we change what we did back in 1999? No. Because we're just one story of many, many stories like us in your audience and not in your audience, who are doing this good work on the ground and taking and connecting that to the harvest and to the product over and over again in our local areas, our regions, and even those who have emerged into national distribution. These are important stories. You know, we all used to be connected, every culture on the planet, all of us, wherever you go. Because in the beginning and early in our development as civilization, we got our food, clothing, and shelter locally and regionally. That's how we survived, right? It took so long to get to where we ended up with global marketplaces and massive supply systems that are disconnected from the source, disconnected the products from the processes and the skills that it takes to convert a harvest to a usable good, and all the people that have touched it. We've all become disconnected. There are broken chains, broken systems. And today we are reaping the rewards of that change, or the results, not necessarily the rewards. We're reaping the results of those broken regional, local systems for food and fiber and shelter. And when we start taking it back like we did in 99, all of a sudden the connections get joined. The threads become woven again, and we become stronger together. It's touched us in so many ways. It's taught us so many lessons, and we would never change having made that decision.
And that evolved into two more things. One is you assembled a larger group of farmers to accommodate all the demand for
Yeah,
US wool. And then
yeah,
the other thing that you learned out of this is the ecosystem services benefits, that there's opportunities to satisfy people's needs in that world. So one of the things
yeah,
I've been talking a lot about farmers is um, one of my goals for my farm is to have, instead of just looking for more acres, making sure every acre is not only providing a product, but it provides a value add opportunity and provides an ecosystem services opportunity, and getting that whole pie that that can happen within land stewardship. Talk to us about how you got other farmers involved, and then also how the ecosystem, with the time we got left here, with the ecosystem services and how that
yeah.
came together.
Yes, thank you. You know, these have all been logical steps. We were here, we wanted to see the land win. We wanted to focus with the natural resource health as the focus. We built this plan, we implemented this plan. We saw these changes, then we had that addition of loss of markets. We responded, we went forward, we attached our stewardship and our heritage to the product. It resonated with authenticity, it grew for us. We carried on all that work in parallel. But my husband had a degenerative illness and his health was declining. By 2015, it was becoming very evident that I needed to return my focus to him. Because when you're running a meat company and a fashion and wool and textile company, you're at multiple trade shows, you've got multiple business channels, and you work a lot of hours because those are separate businesses really from your core business, which is agriculture, right? So you've just added all of this to your life and added employees. So now your management increases, and all of that takes time. It all takes time. And what I needed to do was make a really hard decision. And so we did. We sold off our entire value-added wool business to outside investors who had been following our journey. and they wanted to take that on. So we sold it. And I became a caregiver to my husband and went to the sidelines, actually. I passed the meat marketing ultimately to the next generation. And I was Dan's full-time caregiver pretty much in 2016 and on. But what had happened was another brand had come to us and asked us to be third-party certified for our land care and our animal welfare, our animal husbandry practices. This was a growing sector, and it still is. It's a very expanding sector. Brands want to de-risk themselves from association with land degradation and animal abuse in the harvest that they choose to pull into their supply systems. So these third-party standards are very important to help increase the confidence of the brand partner who buys your harvest and the customer who ultimately chooses that product. So we went down that road at the request of Patagonia in 2015. And when the new standard, this new global standard, which has become the leading standard for sheep and wool production globally, it's called the Responsible Wool Standard. When it launched in 2016, our Imperial Stock Ranch became the first ranch in the world certified. But now I'm on the sidelines and brands are calling me for this RWS certified wool, and I'm not in a position to sell it to them. So Dan and I talked, and I said, Dan, we can do business differently. Let's create a model that allows me to be here with you. I won't make a product. Let's just create a supply that meets this global standard, and we'll get other ranches to join us. I'll take care of the certification, lead this model. You and I can travel together. See, I could still care for him, and we could visit ranches. How much fun is that? He loved it. And we got them certified. So I established a new company to scale the supply of wool meeting the Responsible Wool Standard here in the Western US. And that company is Shaniko Wool Company, named for Shaniko, which is Oregon's most famous ghost town, located 12 miles from our headquarters. And it was the wool shipping capital of the world in 1901 when it was born, right? Immediately 4 million pounds of wool went out of there. It was a rail center. And you can repeat this all around the world, how that part of our culture was important, those rail shipping centers. And so Shaniko Wool Company got underway in 2018. And in the winter of 19, a brand that I was talking to that we could supply RWS wool for their products here in America that they were going to make, that brand challenged me straight out. Said, do you guys in raising livestock destroy the soil and just put methane in the atmosphere? Are you just net polluters of the environment? They challenged me straight out. And my first response was anger. You know, how does somebody in a cubicle in a high rise in the city who is removed from agriculture, why do they have the right to challenge how we do business? But that is how it is. That is how it is. But the best thing that happened that day after I calmed down was I realized that up to now, as agriculturalists, as farmers and ranchers, we've had our observations, yield data, species counts, agency testimony, some monitoring, and now we were third-party audited annually to a standard that has more than 270 criteria or benchmarks we must meet to be certified. That's on land care, which is very comprehensive, nutrient management, pesticide use, soil testing, water, biodiversity, all the breadth of animal husbandry and animal welfare concerns, worker welfare. This is a deep standard. And we go through a very deep audit every year. We had all of that, and it wasn't good enough, was it? It wasn't good enough. People are still going to question whether we have a net negative whether we're destroying the earth or whether we're positive. And I said, well, that's it. It's time to measure. So I didn't know if we could, and I didn't know how, because remember, I'm not anything. I'm not a marketer. I'm not a brand developer. I'm not a PR person. I'm not a wool expert. I'm not a business person. I'm just a worker bee. So I started reaching around and I found Dr. John Talbot at Oregon State University. And I said, John, I want to determine the net carbon footprint of our ranching operation. Oh, and by the way, all the operations in my new farm group. He goes, how many is that? I said 10. Collectively, there are 10 ranches who are part of Shaniko Wool Company. We graze and farm together 2.6 million acres in the West. We're in multiple states. I said, I want to quantify the net carbon footprint of each ranching operation. Can we do that? He said, yes, we can. I said, okay. And if we end up being net positive for nature, does that have value? He said, yes, Jeannie, it does. And this was the beginning of truly my education in calculating and determining the net impacts of ranching operations. And if we are net positive, understanding the factors to sell that harvest, that new deliverable, which is, you could arguably say, is the greatest deliverable we bring, is our ecosystem, our net positive ecosystem deliverable. So that's where we are today, Monty, is we have been measuring since the spring of 2020. We've got 4 years behind us. Our ranch here in Oregon, we have the most data. We've developed the model here. We do soil testing down to 60 centimeters. We do biomass. We pull forage samples. We do water measurements, nitrogen. We use the leading computer models to determine our inputs. And we have fully analyzed now 5 of the 10 ranches, which represents 750,000 acres. Every one of the 5 is operating as a net carbon sink with a net greenhouse gas emissions value that is negative, below zero. And our avoided emissions is about 75,000 tons a year, which, those sell at about $29 a ton by the ton now. But without cap and trade in the United States, and I'm really speaking outside my realm of expertise here. Well, actually, I have been the whole time we've been on this recording, right? I can just speak to my experience. But we aren't yet able to monetize the emission stuff in the way we are set up now in the evolving voluntary carbon market in the United States. That's where we have the best opportunity now. And our ranch, which, my husband, we lost him in the summer of 21. So he didn't live to see a lot of things. He didn't live to see this data prove his vision and his observations. We now are ground truthing the observations of farmers and ranchers. We're bringing the data that unequivocally supports the fact that we are bringing a positive impact to nature in how we farm and graze our livestock. We have the data to prove it. And it's been peer reviewed, it's third party, and we've been approved. My Shaniko Wool Group has been approved as a project, its own project because of the scale, to bring quality carbon credits to market. Dan didn't get to see that or to see his oldest son be in his 3rd year of a carbon contract, which is generating a new income stream to him, helping him do additional things and move across some of the practices we had done at a smaller scale on our operation, expand that work across more landscapes. So this is the greatest work I have ever done. And it's been a personal investment to get this data, but I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't change it. It's going to prove to the naysayers, to the anti-animal livestock contingent, to those who don't believe that in agriculture we have a positive impact on nature. This is what we have to do to prove our value today. And I would invest in it again.
I love that story, and it's you just how you're just a worker bee. Um, I think your experience leads to expertise. The two words are closely related for a reason. Um, no, it's an amazing journey you've been on. Yeah, I'm sorry that your husband couldn't see the numbers. That would have been wonderful,
Yeah.
but he saw the numbers with his eyes because he was observant to what was going on, and I think that was probably enough for him.
And he saw the numbers with his heart.
Mhm.
It was his heart that drove. You know, I've been questioned by so many people in big cities and big corporate brands. You know, I've gotten so many emails and communications over the years. People truly think that we're in agriculture for the profits, that we're profit driven. Like most people in business are in business because they're profit driven. I mean, this is an industry where the masses, especially when you speak to family agriculture, you're purpose driven people. You know, you're not in it without a passion and a heart. And so he saw it with his heart first, always, because from the time he was a little kid. And then he applied his skills as an engineer and a business guy to the dream opportunity he had. And the land flourished because of it. And I think that's the story of most people in agriculture in this country.
Well said. Well said. Well, anything else that we should have had taken a moment to talk about while we're together, or maybe what the next steps are, where you see the future of the ranch heading?
We are fighting a mountain. I mean, I'm climbing a mountain every day that I can't even see the summit of. And, you know, I have been committed to remaining within our borders and working as close to home as possible since I started this journey in 1999. But it's very hard, just like the salmon that swim upstream against all the obstacles, whether it be dams or predators or commercial fishing or all of the other things that they must negotiate to get from our ranch where they're born down these little feeder creeks to the desert rivers, out to the Columbia and into the mighty Pacific Ocean, right? There's threats to them all along the way. And then they, miracle of miracles, they find the mouth of that river and they come all the way back through more obstacles to come home to spawn before they die. What we do on this ranch impacts their life and their viability. And I feel like those salmon, in trying to get fashion brands and textile brands to work with American wool and make things here at home. It's still an uphill battle. The bottom line is that industry is profit driven. And that's why the majority of them are still in Asia and the global South. That's nothing against those countries. But it's just that we do not support this very important industry in our own country. And that's the battle, that's the mountain I climb every day to try to hope that we can keep standing, is who will buy our Shaniko wool and make things in America to support every one of us that's touching the ground every day in agriculture and grazing animals, and those who have reinvented themselves and stayed here to wash that wool and spin it and dye it and weave it and knit it and cut and sew it into the usable things. And gosh, we're loving the fact that we're now able to buy some products with our wool and use them. I'm wearing them right now in my work, you know, but it's a small scale still. The big scale manufacturing and our textile industry is still offshore, and that's a hard battle, and I don't know if we're going to win. The jury is still out whether we'll make it or not.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us together today. And I'm sure there's some farmers that can identify with your story are going to take the next right step of looking at adding value or adding to ecosystems just because it's the right thing to do and they're passionate about it. And I'm sure whether it's the offshore enterprise or anything else, that mountain you will keep climbing, no doubt. I can tell. So I
Well, thank
really
you.
appreciate
Thank
everything that
you.
you've done.
Thank you for having me on. And, we're all stronger together. So, thank you for telling our story. My story is still really not that well known. Um, it's interesting. I know we're probably out of time, but my story is known globally because of my voice for the responsible wool standard. And it's more important in Europe and Asia where they're manufacturing than it is in America, right? So I was invited to have our story featured in the latest book on King Charles' life and legacy, because he is known globally for his efforts in organic and more sustainable and regenerative farming. He launched the campaign for wool in 2010, so he's always been a strong supporter of wool. And he invited me to have my story as part of his book because of my efforts here in the US with wool. And so I was able to go to London November 14th. I was there at the launch of the book on his birthday at the party. And what an honor. Hopefully things like that will lift the credibility of our efforts here in the Western US, and it will help influence more people to invest in Shaniko wool and support the ranching efforts in this country and make goods here.
It can only help. It can only help. So,
Let's hope.
all right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And I look forward. I reserve the opportunity to swing by the headquarters and see the ranch someday.
Okay, you got it. I'm here.
Perfect. Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to this conversation today. Jeanne embodies what it means to have a passion and desire to steward the land. And more than that, she's constantly working to find a way to preserve and protect the future of wool, the land, and the ranchers they work with. This system approach to sustainable regenerative practices that she and Dan have implemented is evidence of what we believe works when helping growers successfully build healthy soils. It's absolutely system driven. So if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing to help growers adopt a systems approach to soil health, check out our website at asn.farm, and there you can click on links to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. There's a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.